I'm Catherine Kingsley.
And I'm Catherine Stern.
And this is
Contemplating Culture,
a missionary walk through a secular age. Together we journey through A Secular Age by Charles Taylor, a book looking at the history and philosophy of how the world got where it is, and the impacts of our contemporary culture for us today as missionaries.
And we're inviting you to join the conversation.
Welcome to Contemplating Culture.
Hello, everyone.
So today we continue in looking at the social imaginary, and I guess particularly three ways that the social imaginary expands or mutates. So our believable reality starts to shift as different things are happening. So the one we're looking at today is the economy as objectified reality. So I have to confess, I don't really do much money stuff. I never really found it that interesting growing up. And I guess as a missionary now, I still don't have a lot to do with the economy. So I know that there's a lot of people that know a lot more, but I guess we're just trying to present today, what Taylor has to say of how this shift happens historically.
Yeah, I'm afraid I'm like pulling out 20 years ago stuff that I studied as part of political science. So I'm apologising too if my facts are a little off.
Yes. But I think it's important, and I think it's important to talk about because even, just sitting here reflecting, I think one of the things that we'll find as we're looking at the economy as objectified reality is people are happy for the economy to exist until it starts affecting them. And, I might be in a position right now where I have the freedom to not worry about it or not be, understanding all the nits and gritty kind of things, but we really need people in the world that do. It'll become even more evident as we go through of actually we need people that really understand this stuff and have the skills and apply the gospel to the economy.
Absolutely. And if you think about what we were talking about in our last podcast, about people who are able to stand outside the box and ask the questions and critically think about, the social imaginary itself. So standing outside and questioning what we believe is normal, real.
Yes.
And what we expect, but also to think creatively within that. So if this is the social imaginary, if this is how we expect the economy to work and shape our world, and yet we can see it's not fair or something not right about it, we can both critique it, but also creatively, how do we work with that to bring the best results for not just myself or my family, but the world, the people who need it.
So I guess one of the first things to say is that we can use the phrase the economy, and we both understand what we're talking about. And I guess what we're talking about, like this mutation, is that was not always the case. If you go back, say, 500 years, the economy was not a thing.
No, the closest you could get was like the household budget of a feudal lord, really, and that probably wasn't a thing in its own right either.
So it's become this object that we can talk about, that we can measure, all these kinds of things. So I guess we're looking at the journey of how did we get here. So Taylor says a couple of episodes ago we were talking about the modern moral order and some of the things that start to emerge with that. And I guess one of them is kind of that rise of polite society. So you've got this order kind of coming about, and as society is being ordered and structured, that you have the kind of emergence of mutual benefit, that it is good for me and it is good for you and us as a nation that we are ordered, settled people, and we're going to be ordered and settled if we have a stable job. And that stable job will produce some kind of income, and I'll use that income to exchange for goods and services that will be beneficial for me. So I'm going to be using my income to buy things that are going to be working towards my personal goal, and I'm going to buy them off you, and then you're going to use that income to work towards your personal goals. So we've got this mutual benefit of I'm working towards my goals, you're working towards your goals, but we're meeting in a place of mutual benefit where both of our goals are kind of supporting each other.
And this is kind of but an individual outlook on mutual benefit, as opposed to the society where you've come from, where we're working towards the goals of our common feudal lord, and the mutual benefit that we gain is that he supports us and we support each other. Now we have our own personal goals and we're trading to achieve our personal goals rather than someone else's goals.
Yes. And so Taylor kind of makes a little point that even before this polite society, a little bit earlier, it's even preceded by the introduction of Grotius and Locke and their kind of ordering of natural law and how we interact, that, you know, these one little ideas kind of take mutation over time. And one of his favourite phrases is, it's a step on the long march. And so he'll use this often. He'll say, you know, like natural law was a step on the long march. The rise of polite society was a step on the long march towards the moral world that we have at the moment. Anything that we're talking about, that it's a long, slow walk, and one thing leads to another kind of thing.
Okay, so the thinker who's really, in my head, the step in the long march here is a guy called Adam Smith. And in my memory of what we learnt about Adam Smith back in my undergraduate days, he's like the father of modern economics, and his writings, I think there's one called On the Wealth of Nations, where he basically puts out a vision for a free trade society where the market really regulates itself.
Right.
And like governments don't, you know, put in tariffs and stuff to look after themselves. But he argues for the fact that if you let the market regulate itself, then everyone is better off. So that's the first time we start hearing about the market, the economy, talked about as its own thing.
Right.
Something separate to the government.
Sure. And he talks about Adam Smith. So I'd never heard of him before, but that's just my ignorance. So explain to me what the idea behind kind of removing tariffs is. Like, what's the benefit of that?
Well, if I put a tariff in and stop you from, I don't know, selling your shoes at the price that you want to sell them at, then I can stop you from taking over the market from my local shoe sellers, because my local shoe sellers might not be able to produce shoes at the same cost as you, and you might then be able to undercut the market of my local shoemakers and put them out of business. So if I then put in a tariff and stop you from doing that, then I essentially save my local shoemakers. But Adam Smith is saying, well, no, if they can't make them cheaply enough, then like let the market show them that and put them out of business, or they learn a different way of making them, or they take up something else. Maybe what's actually needed is not shoe sellers in this area, it's wheat growers. So they go and put their effort into wheat growing, and that's what's actually needed, and that's where they'll make money.
Right. That makes a lot of sense for me as to how I see so many people living their lives of almost like, even though we live in a society of endless choices, it almost feels like it starts to direct people towards, where am I going to make money?
Yeah. So instead of, you know, the government or the feudal lord having some sense of responsibility towards my people and looking after them, is stepping back and Adam Smith is saying, you know, step back, let the market sort that out. So it becomes this amoral area where the market forces, if you like, if there's too many bakers in town, someone's going to go out of business. That's natural. It's like, you know, lions eat rabbits kind of thing. And it's not the end of the world if they go out of business there. There'll be something else, somewhere else, another way of supporting themselves. But like, why are we trying to sustain 7 bakers in town when we only need 5 bakers worth of bread?
Sure. And I can see there the little traces of natural law then, of how that's kind of come about, that it's a natural ordering of things, and we should rearrange ourselves to fit that natural order. Just accept that that's how things are naturally ordered. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the problem there becomes that it takes that sense of responsibility for the other out of the picture for anyone.
Right.
If you're going to go purely with that vision of things, I have to stand back and let my neighbour's business go under and not do anything about it.
Right. Wow.
Which kind of fits, I guess, with this individualistic outlook that's coming in that I'm actually, you know, really worried about my own business, and I'm just focused on that, and watching you go under is terrifying because that could happen to me too, or it could as easily have been me. So I'm just going to leave my blinkers on and look after myself and hope that you find some other way. Maybe I could employ you in the meantime so that you and your family don't starve if I've got enough money to do that. But ultimately this outlook, it makes us much more individually focused.
Right. And it's probably at both ends, like it's coming about because we are more individually focused, that it's all kind of interweaving. It's so interesting. So one of the things Taylor talks about at this point is that nations kind of are realizing that the economy is a thing. And so they have a choice then to develop their economy, to put work into encouraging people to be in their own lane of productivity, I guess, and therefore be contributing to the wider viability of the nation, or your nation doesn't promote the economy and you're left depending. And I guess that would be really how we see the first, second, third world kind of splits happening at the moment, I guess, is an outcome of this, that those that develop and then those that depend.
Yeah, although it's messier than that these days, don't you think? Like if you look at where we're dependent upon, some of that's we're dependent on the third world for the production of all of our electronic goods these days. There's a whole new balancing of all that in the world today.
It's very true. So I guess we're still looking at around the 18th century, and there's, I guess, two movements that Taylor talks about that are really pushing this mutation of the need for development of the economy. The first one being political. So we've kind of talked about this before, that it is good for society if its citizens are settled, and they'll be settled if they have an occupation that is economic. And that will also mean that they're then peaceful citizens. So our energy, rather than warcraft, is going into crafting stable society. But then he says that you've also got, I guess, a spiritual kind of thing that's happening at this time where, you know, like post-Reformation, we're looking at now we want to be, we've knocked out the higher vocations, and we're saying that all human lives have honor and dignity, and in fact we're hallowing the ordinary daily life that the vast majority of people are living, so we've got to be kind of honoring it. So this kind of elevation of the economic occupation that the vast majority of people find themselves in, and
working hard. Like this is the era of the Protestant work ethic, which drives a whole lot of this stuff, I think, and really sits at the backbone of the Industrial Revolution. Yeah.
And so Taylor quotes this guy, Alexander Pope, who says that true self-love and social are the same. So I guess it's this idea that if I'm doing what's good for me, it's good for society. It's social for me. So it's good for you that I'm in my lane doing my productivity thing because it's good for us as a whole.
It's an interesting one to think on, isn't it? I like the use of the word true self-love because I think that if you just said self-love, it might be more uncomfortable.
So we've got this, I guess one of the things of why this is, like, what makes this different to just people having money or things like that? Like, what makes this different for the economy becoming a thing is that I think it starts to shape the understanding of society's self-understanding. That we've come out of a time when the place where society happened was the political sphere or the religious sphere, and now the economy is the place where society is happening. Especially Industrial Revolution, like that's where society is thinking, talking. There's so much happening around economy.
Yeah, and I think in that era, the business of government becomes much, much more about money, the economy. And maybe in that era still, though, I mean, Adam Smith's an idea. He doesn't get really taken up maybe for another century or two. But like the business of government becomes, what are we doing about the economy? Much more than that whole war or other things that must have taken their time up. These days, you would almost say that the government does its best, but the economy is almost like over and above the government, I would say, in the way that, like, because we've got this global economy and you've got global companies that are bigger than most governments.
Yeah. The Taylor Swift Eras tour single-handedly boosted the American economy. Just like consumerism and the capacity to generate money outside of government is now the place where, I guess, the power sits, where conversations happen, all of that kind of thing.
Yeah, just the sense of, instead of this being about me and what I need to live, like the economy being a thing, one of the parts of the social imaginary, I think, in our society around the economy is that it will continue to get more prosperous and that my living standards should get better. And so my desires, the things that I think I should have, get more and more. And the economy sort of drives that, that there's this world out there of advertising, for instance, that tells me that I need these kind of shoes and I need to eat this kind of food and have these kinds of experiences to fully live. And so instead of, you know, it being about making sure that I'm clothed and sheltered and so's my family and that, you know, we have a reasonable standard of living, suddenly my standard of living, my ideas about what I need to, how much money I need to have in order to live is expanded to include all of these things as well.
Yes.
So I work harder, longer hours, cut corners, whatever it is that it will take to make that kind of money, to have those sort of experiences or have those sort of possessions.
Yes. And I remember reading something somewhere that talked about, I guess, in the 20th century, is that that's the 1900s? Yep. The emergence of young adult.
Ooh,
because you have, I guess, like, you know, like a generation where you kind of went from being a teenager to being married, right? But as a lot of things start to shift, you've got this idea of the young adult who has a disposable income and
no dependence.
Exactly. So they don't need to be housing themselves in the same way because they you know, possibly living at home for a while. They can save up a bit of money. And so then the emergence of commercialism, effectively, where you've got this, like, exactly, I can now target this young adult culture. I'm now just not going to make shoes. The whole emergence of the sneaker market. That I can make you want something that you're never even going to wear. You're just going to have these shoes on a little stand in your room to say that you own these shoes. Like, that's the value of them. But you're going to work, you know, like a whole 6 months to be able to pay off these shoes that you're never going to wear. That choice starts to happen because, exactly, if I can get you to buy this thing, that's going to put me in a better position. But you were talking as well about, that the economy starts to influence politics, or starts to be something that politics becomes about. And Taylor also talks about that there's a kind of a point where they start to measure economy. They start to measure not how many sheep do you have or things like that, but they start to measure actually where is the money in our country, where's it sitting, how's it distributed, and then using that to form policy. That this is a new development as well, that we're using this object, this measurable thing, to then form political policy. Well, a couple of the outcomes of the economy being this thing, one of them is, I guess, as we've talked before with time, as soon as you start to make something an object, you start to feel like it's limited. And when it's limited, you start to feel like there's conflict then about what happens with the limited thing. There's competition for the limited thing. And so this is the idea of a zero-sum economy. So there's a limited amount and we've got to fight for, you know, a piece of the pie, effectively. And then what happens in this is that this is the thing that we're chasing after, and we start to not think so much about the cost of pursuing that thing. So obviously the cost on human lives and what it means for your family at home, that you're working so many hours to really feed someone else's business, the impact on the environment, all of these kinds of things. And also the idea that, like, an object, you know, like a table, there's no morality sitting around a table. It's the same thing, that the economy is just there. It's an object, and it kind of sometimes can then sit outside moral consideration. And I don't know, I just see the impacts of all of this, and it's quite depressing kind of reality in some ways, the free market.
Yeah, so it's probably not surprising then that within 100 years of Adam Smith and his whole idea of the free market, you get Karl Marx and his whole idea of the oppression of the workers and the encouragement for workers to rise up and take over, and the whole vision of what communism should look like.
This happens in history, doesn't it? That you get a movement one way and then you get the reaction to that movement.
Yeah, but I also was thinking that there's something about communism that's still around today. Like, we're talking 100, 200 years later, and the ideas haven't gone away. And I would say it's because the problem hasn't gone away.
Yes.
Because if anything, the market has more and more become this thing that oppresses people, that has the potential to make or break someone's life. And people still see that, and they're still looking for, I guess, what we talked about yesterday, critical thinking, someone to stand outside the social imaginary and think about how it could be different.
Yeah.
And question the assumptions that we make about this is the way it is and it's always going to be this way.
You're right. Even at the recent elections in Australia, I was, I guess, surprised at how many kind of small little parties existed that were like a Marxist or communist, whether explicitly or kind of covertly, but just like that was their policy that they were presenting, because exactly. And I guess there's a lot of discouragement, I guess, for people. We're sitting in times when, you know, people are being priced out of the city that they've lived their whole life in, or things like that. Or, you know, looking at, am I going to be working, like, what am I working for? But I have to work to keep going. You know, there's a lot of tension and fear, and it seems like a really hopeless kind of place in a lot of ways. Like, what do we do?
Well, I think coming back to that space again of the critical and creative thinking would be a good start. And look, the church has been doing this for, I was going to say 2,000 years, but it's probably further back than that when you look at some of what's come through in our history from Judaism as well, that there is a whole strain of thought that hasn't necessarily always changed the way that governments and economies have worked, but is putting principles out there of, well, this is what's important, and if we're going to make decisions about these things, then human dignity is the most important thing. Rather than looking out for my individual needs and that's all, am I looking out for the needs of the wider society? And perhaps I'm not a politician, perhaps I'm not the CEO of some big company, and maybe my life isn't going to change the world at a big level. But I think of that story that gets used and overused perhaps about the kid throwing starfish back into the sea, and someone asking, well, what's the point of that? And the kid saying, well, it made a difference for that one.
Yeah.
That I can, on an individual level, make choices about where I spend my money or how I treat my employees or that kind of thing. That is looking at human dignity and the individual person and their needs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true. Like, you were talking about the critical thinking and the creative thinking, that there'll be times that we need to look outside the box, and I guess particularly there's going to be some people that's going to be their gifting and skill, is to be looking at how can we reimagine, you know, what this thing looks like, how can we challenge what's there. But then there's also going to be times where we're called to work within the system that we are, that we probably can't change or solve the economy. Like, people have been trying, and people that are, you know, very, very skilled, the very best the world has to offer. I don't think anyone's solved the economy, but to be exactly doing those things. And I guess within our faith tradition, the Catholic Church kind of has Catholic social teaching as a series of principles kind of laid out for that kind of decision making. So how to be doing decision making that will be restoring morality to decisions around economy. Pope John Paul II in 1999, when he went to America and was talking about the church in America, kind of had these words for her. He said, the moral vision in this area, so in the area of principles around social teaching, her moral vision in this area rests on the threefold cornerstone of human dignity, solidarity, and subsidiarity, which aims to encourage governments, institutions, and private organisations to shape a future consonant with the dignity of every person. And I guess that I think of that as a good summary, that like no matter what level you're at of having decision, are you able to see the person involved and all the people involved in the decisions that you're making? I guess affirming the dignity of all those people involved. Solidarity, like coming alongside those people then, and yeah, really building that sense of human connectedness.
And sometimes that's a sacrifice, like to stand with someone else and say, like, I won't stand for that, could be the sacrifice of something as simple as I only buy fair trade. It could be the sacrifice of I'm going to strike and take the consequences of that, even though it might be bad for my career or my income, but this is wrong.
Yeah.
Like there's solidarity costs, I would say, perhaps more than just standing back and going, oh, that's against your human dignity.
Yeah, that's so true. And the third one being subsidiarity. So that's looking at, is the decisions being made by the people that it's affecting, and to what degree is that possible? So having decisions made by as close to home as the people it's affecting. So trying to avoid the imposing of things on other people as much as possible, but bringing them in at whatever level, or handing the decision over to them if they're in a state to be able to make that.
And all of these things is going to require both the critical and the creative thinking to stand back and go, hang on a minute, there's something not right here, and to be able to name it in a situation that you're seeing. But then how do I think creatively within this situation to uphold human dignity, or to stand with my neighbour, or to hand over decision-making power in a way that doesn't affect the company adversely, or whatever it is.
Yeah. And I guess, like, one of the outside the box kind of things is to remember that there's more to life and the world than the economy. I guess in the sisters, we have kind of three pillars that we base our life around, being prayer, sisterhood, and mission. So for us, I guess you could say, you know, the mission is our economy kind of thing, like it's our work, but we see that our life is not just work, and it's really important for us to also set aside time for prayer, time for that relationship with God, honouring our ultimate end goal, and then honouring each other and the gift of each other, and setting aside time for sisterhood. But I mean, you would know, Kat, that it's really easy, and we always manage to get the balance right, don't we?
Yeah. We were just discussing before we got on this podcast the fact that we had scheduled to, because we're, you know, making up time because of other things that have gotten in the way, we were going to record another podcast tomorrow, and I just put up my hand and said, I need to have a prayer day tomorrow because I've got too much ministry on Friday, which is when I usually do it. Can we just cancel that one or postpone it to some other day? It'll be really easy to just say, oh no, you know, like this could feed into my prayer.
Yeah.
We'll just do that. You know, it's only the morning.
Exactly. And I guess that's one of the things is this mindset of economy brings about a mindset of productivity. And it doesn't matter whether it's actual money involved or not. Like, it's the world that we live in is a world of productivity. And so I guess one of the messages of the gospel would be, and I mean, it's been there.
I was going to say, it goes further back than the gospel. Come back to Genesis. What did God do after he finished creating the earth?
Exactly. The idea of the Judean Christian idea of Sabbath, you know, that it's so important to honour that we are not made for work.
Yeah. That what we are made for, first of all, is relationship with God, then with each other. And that's really like to push back against that idea of like my whole focus, my whole purpose in life is to achieve something, that's huge. And it's really humanizing, I think, to be able to stop, to enjoy the gift of the world around us, spend time with God. I mean, that's what half our ministry is, ironically, helping other people stop and focus again on, hang on, who am I?
Yeah.
I'm a person who's made for a relationship with God.
Yeah. So for people listening, I guess, what's an invitation for them to kind of just be, I don't know, there's so much kind of tension sitting around the economy sometimes, and they might be thinking a lot of things at the moment. Like, what's something that they can be taking into their day or their week from here?
Maybe the first question is, what's the critical thinking? What's the question that this is pulling out of me around the way I live or the way that the world around me is living? And even to take to prayer then, what's the creative thinking? How can I work within the structures that are already in place in my life in order to make some statements about who I am and what I'm for?
And then I guess finally, just a real encouragement to find some Sabbath, find something in your week that is not productive, and that doesn't treat you as a consumer. Because I think people think, if I'm not doing the producing, I need to do the consuming.
Yeah, so I'll sit down and watch Netflix all day.
Exactly. So imagine if you could have some time where you weren't producing or consuming, where you were just, existing, whatever that looks like, whether it's being in nature or, something that is going to step you out of the economy for a second.
Yeah, which is hard to do because my mind went, you could be in nature or you could have a meal with your friends. I still think that counts.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. My hope and prayer is that we need good, holy economists in the world to
absolutely
hold the place for those of us who are not.
And people who are willing to make courageous decisions that don't necessarily make sense in our individualistic get-rich-quick world, who are willing to sacrifice some of those goals and ambitions for the greater good, perhaps.
Very good. Well, we will talk to you next time.
Bye, everyone.
This has been Contemplating Culture, a podcast produced by the missionaries of God's Love Sisters. For more information from today's episode, be sure to check out the show notes. We pray that today has blessed you, and most importantly, we invite you to continue the conversation.